Officer James Thompson drove his patrol car slowly through the quiet streets of Millbrook on a bright Tuesday morning. The sun was shining, and most people were already at work or school. James had been a police officer in this small town for 15 years. He knew every street, every shop, and many of the people who lived there. But James had a problem, deep in his heart. He carried unfair thoughts about people who looked different from him. These thoughts had grown stronger over the years, like weeds in a garden that nobody had taken care of. He told himself he was just doing his job, but the truth was harder to face. As James turned onto Maple Street, the nicest part of town where big houses sat behind perfect lawns, he noticed a black sedan driving ahead of him. The car was moving a little faster than the speed limit allowed. James turned on his flashing lights and pulled the car over. Behind the wheel sat a woman named Rebecca Johnson. She was in her 30s with kind eyes and wore a dark blue business suit. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she looked professional and confident. Rebecca had been driving to an important meeting when she saw the police lights in her mirror. Rebecca pulled over carefully and turned off her engine. She placed her hands on the steering wheel where the officer could see them. Just as her father had taught her long ago, she took a deep breath and waited. James walked up to the car with heavy steps. Before he even reached the window, his mind was already filled with suspicious thoughts. He saw Rebecca's face and immediately decided she did not belong in this neighborhood. His jaw tightened, and his friendly morning mood disappeared completely. "License and registration," James said in a rough voice. He did not say good morning or explain why he had stopped her. His tone was cold and unfriendly from the very first. "Words." Rebecca looked up at him with calm eyes. She had dealt with difficult situations before in her work. Though James did not know this, "Of course, officer," she said politely. "May I ask what I did wrong?" Her respectful question should have made James feel better, but instead it made him more angry. In his twisted thinking, he believed she was trying to act innocent when she was really up to something bad. He watched as Rebecca reached into her purse to get her license and into the glove box for her registration papers. "Here you are, sir," Rebecca said, handing him the documents. Her driver's license showed she lived in the next town over, and her car registration was completely up to date. Everything was proper and legal, but James had already made up his mind about Rebecca. He looked at her license and then stared at her face with suspicious eyes. "What are you really doing in this neighborhood?" he demanded, his voice getting louder. Rebecca felt her heart beat faster, but she kept her voice calm and steady. "I have a business meeting at the law offices on Oak Street," she explained. "I'm running a little late, which is probably why I was driving too fast. I apologize for that." James did not want to hear her explanation. The more polite and reasonable Rebecca acted, the more it bothered him. In his mind, he had decided she was lying, though he had no reason to think this except for the color of her skin. "Get out of the car," James ordered, his hand moving toward his belt. Rebecca's training kicked in, though James did not know she had any special training. "Officer, I'd like to stay in my vehicle if that's okay. I haven't done anything wrong besides maybe driving a little too fast." This made James even more angry. He saw a refusal to get out as disrespect, when really Rebecca was just trying to stay safe. His face turned red, and his breathing became heavy. "I said get out of the car," James shouted. Reaching for the door handle, Rebecca realized the situation was becoming dangerous. She had seen officers like James before in her work, but she had never been on the receiving end of such treatment. She slowly opened her door and stepped out, keeping her movements careful and non-threatening. James grabbed Rebecca's arm roughly and spun her around to face the car. "Put your hands on the hood." He ordered, "Officer, please," Rebecca said, her voice still controlled despite her fear. "I've cooperated with everything you've asked. My documents are valid, and I've explained why I'm here." But James was not listening anymore. Years of buried prejudice and anger had taken control of his actions in a moment that would change both of their lives forever. He lost all control and struck Rebecca hard across the face with the back of his hand. The sound of the slap echoed in the quiet morning air. Rebecca's head snapped to the side, and she felt a sharp pain spread across her cheek. For a moment, she could not believe what had just happened. As Rebecca stood there with her hand touching her stinging cheek, James began to realize what he had done. But it was too late to take it back. What James did not know was that Rebecca Johnson was not just any citizen. She was Special Agent Rebecca Johnson of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. For the past 6 months, she had been working undercover, investigating reports of police officers in Millbrook treating people unfairly, especially people of color. As Rebecca sat back down in her car, her face burning with pain and shame, she quietly reached into her purse and activated a small recording device. She had been gathering evidence for weeks, but she never expected to become a victim herself. This moment would become the key evidence in a federal case that would shake the entire Millbrook Police Department and change their small town forever. Rebecca sat in her car, her cheek still burning from James's strike. She pressed a small button on the recording device hidden in her purse, knowing that backup would arrive soon. The pain in her face was nothing compared to the anger she felt. But she had been trained to stay calm in dangerous situations. James stood beside her car, breathing heavily. Part of him knew he had crossed a terrible line, but his pride would not let him apologize. He looked round the quiet street, hoping no one had seen what happened. The wealthy neighborhood was still and peaceful, with only the sound of birds singing in the morning air. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by the sound of car engines. James looked up to see 3 dark cars driving quickly toward them. His stomach dropped as he realized these were not regular police cars. They had no markings on them, and they moved with purpose that made him nervous. The cars stopped in a half-circle round James and Rebecca. Car doors opened quickly, and several men and women stepped out. They wore dark blue jackets with big yellow letters on the back that spelled FBI. Each person showed a shiny badge that caught the morning sunlight. James felt his knees go weak. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was here, in his small town, surrounding him. His mind raced as he tried to understand what was happening. Why would the FBI care about a simple traffic stop? A tall man with graying hair walked straight to Rebecca's car. His face showed concern and anger at the same time. "Agent Johnson, are you all right?" he asked in a voice that was both gentle and serious. James felt the world spin around him. Agent Johnson, the woman he had just hit, was an FBI agent. His mouth fell open, and he could not form any words. Everything he thought he knew about this morning was wrong. Rebecca stepped out of her car slowly, her hand still pressed against her red cheek. Even though she was hurt and embarrassed, she stood tall and spoke with the dignity that came from years of training. "I'm fine, Michael, but we have everything we need now." Agent Michael Davis had been Rebecca's partner for 3 years. They had worked together on many difficult cases, but seeing his partner hurt made him angrier than he had ever been. He looked at James with cold eyes that promised justice would come. "Officer Thompson," Michael said, his voice like ice, "you are under arrest for assault on a federal agent." James's legs almost gave out completely. Federal agent. The words echoed in his mind like thunder. He had not just hit a regular citizen. He had attacked someone who worked for the government, someone who was investigating crimes. His career was over. His life as he knew it was finished. Two other FBI agents moved toward James. One was a woman named Agent Sarah Wilson, and the other was Agent Robert Clark. They had been watching from a distance, ready to help Rebecca if she needed them. Now they would arrest the man who had hurt their colleague. "Sir, please put your hands behind your back," Agent Wilson said firmly but professionally. James did not resist. He felt like he was in a bad dream, but the cold metal handcuffs on his wrists told him this was very real. As the handcuffs clicked shut, James began to understand something terrible. This was not just about today. The FBI did not send agents to investigate one police officer unless something much bigger was happening. They had been watching him. They knew about other things he had done. Rebecca watched as James was arrested, but she felt no joy in seeing him defeated. She thought about all the people who had called the FBI office over the past year. Citizens of Millbrook had been complaining about unfair treatment from police officers, especially James Thompson. They said he was rougher with black citizens, more suspicious, more likely to use force when it was not needed. The FBI had decided to investigate these complaints 6 months ago. Rebecca had volunteered to go undercover, to see for herself if the reports were true. She had driven through Millbrook many times, always following traffic laws, always being polite. She was hoping to gather evidence of unfair treatment, but she never thought she would be hit by an officer. Agent Davis helped Rebecca toward one of the FBI cars. "We need to get you to the hospital," he said gently. "We have to document your injuries for the case." Rebecca nodded, knowing this was important. Every bruise, every mark would be photographed and recorded. It would become evidence in a federal case that could change how police officers in Millbrook treated people. As James was placed in the back of an FBI car, he saw neighbors starting to come out of their houses. Word was already spreading through the quiet streets. People were talking on their phones, posting on social media, sending text messages. By lunchtime, everyone in Millbrook would know that Officer James Thompson had been arrested by the FBI. James's radio crackled with confused voices from other police officers asking what was happening. His sergeant was demanding answers. The whole police department would soon learn that one of their own had attacked a federal agent. Rebecca was driven to Millbrook General Hospital, where doctors would examine her injuries. As she sat in the back of the FBI car, she thought about all the other victims who had suffered in silence. People who had been treated unfairly by James, but were too scared to speak up against the police. Officer. Now those people would have a voice. Now there would be justice. Rebecca was determined to make sure this case brought real change to Millbrook, so no one else would have to feel the sting of unfair treatment ever again. The phone call came at 6 in the morning, 3 days after James's arrest. Chief of Police Robert Hayes spoke in a cold, official voice that James had never heard before. "Officer Thompson, you are terminated from the Millbrook Police Department, effective immediately. Your badge and remaining equipment must be returned by noon today." James sat on the edge of his bed, still in his pajamas, holding the phone with a shaking hand. 15 years of his life, gone in one terrible moment. He had expected this call, but hearing the words made everything feel final and real. He walked to his kitchen and made coffee with hands that would not stop trembling. The local newspaper was already on his doorstep, and his picture was on the front page under the headline "Local Officer Arrested by FBI." James could not bring himself to read the article. He already knew how bad it would make him look. The television news was even worse. Every channel in the area was talking about his case. They showed the street where he had stopped Rebecca. They interviewed his neighbors, and they talked about other complaints that had been made against him over the years. James turned off the television and sat in silence. Emma, his wife of 12 years, had packed her bags the night before. She stood in their bedroom doorway with tears in her eyes, holding the hands of their two young children, Lucy and Tom. The children did not understand why Mommy was crying or why Daddy was in trouble. "I can't do this any more, James," Emma said quietly. "I've watched you become someone I don't recognize. The man I married was kind and fair. I don't know who you are now." James wanted to argue, to tell her he was still the same person. But the words stuck in his throat. Deep down, he knew she was right. He had changed over the years, letting anger and prejudice grow in his heart like poison. "Where will you go?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "To my sister's house in the next town," Emma replied. "The children and I need time to think about what comes next. Maybe you need that time too." After Emma and the children left, the house felt empty and cold. James's friends from the police department stopped calling him. His neighbors avoided eye contact when he walked to his mailbox. The whole town of Millbrook knew what he had done, and most people were ashamed to be associated with him. James spent his days sitting in his small apartment, watching news reports about his case and reading angry comments on social media. People he had known for years were calling him terrible names. Some said he should go to prison. Others said he should leave town and never come back. Meanwhile, across town, Rebecca was dealing with her own struggles. The bruise on her face had turned purple and yellow, and it hurt to smile or chew food, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional hurt she carried inside. Rebecca had spent her whole career fighting against injustice and protecting people who could not protect themselves. She had always been the one helping victims, not being a victim herself. The experience had shaken her confidence and made her question things she had never doubted before. But Rebecca was not alone in her pain. As news of her case spread through Millbrook, other people began to come forward with their own stories. A young man named David Williams called the FBI office to report that James had stopped him 3 times in 1 month for no real reason. An elderly woman named Mary Johnson said James had been rude to her grandson during a traffic stop last year. The stories kept coming. A father said James had treated his teenage son roughly during a school event. A shop owner said, "James always seemed suspicious when black customers came into the neighborhood." Pattern after pattern emerged, showing that James's behavior toward Rebecca was not unusual for him. Pastor William Baker of the Community Baptist Church had been watching these events unfold with a he. By heart, Pastor Baker was a wise man in his 60s who had seen too many lives destroyed by hatred and prejudice. He believed deeply in the power of forgiveness and the possibility that people could change. Pastor Baker reached out to Rebecca first. He visited her at the FBI office and spoke with her about organizing community meetings to discuss police reform and healing. Healing can't begin until we face the truth. Pastor Baker told Rebecca during one of their conversations, and sometimes the person who caused the hurt can become part of the solution. Rebecca was not ready to forgive James. The anger was still too fresh and the hurt too deep. But she respected Pastor Baker and was willing to listen to his ideas. She had seen too much hatred in her work with the FBI. Maybe there was another way forward that could bring real change instead of just punishment. Pastor Baker also wrote a letter to James. It was a difficult letter to write, because he wanted to be honest about the wrong that had been done while still offering hope for redemption. The letter was an invitation to attend a community meeting about healing and change. When James found the letter in his mailbox, his first reaction was anger. Who was this pastor to tell him about redemption? James crumpled up the letter and threw it in the trash can. He did not want to face the community. He did not want to see the hurt and anger in people's eyes. But that night, as James sat alone in his dark apartment, he found himself thinking about the letter. He walked to the kitchen and pulled it out of the trash. He smoothed out the wrinkles and read it again by the light of the refrigerator. Maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for him to become a better person. The autumn leaves were falling outside the Millbrook Community Center when James Thompson made the hardest decision of his life. For 3 months, he had been living like a ghost in his own town. He had lost his job, his family, and his friends. Most days, he did not even leave his apartment except to buy food or go to the post office. But Pastor Baker's letter had stayed with him all this time. James had read it so many times that the paper was soft and worn from his fingers. The pastor talked about healing and second chances, about facing the truth and finding a way forward. James was not sure he deserved a second chance, but he knew he could not keep living the way he was. The community center was an old brick building in the heart of Millbrook. James had driven past it thousands of times during his years as a police officer, but he had never been inside for a community meeting. His hands were sweating as he pulled open the heavy wooden door. The meeting room was full of people sitting in a circle of folding chairs. James recognized many faces from around town, but they all looked at him differently now. Some faces showed anger, others showed sadness, and a few showed something that might have been pity. The room became completely quiet when James walked in. He could hear his own footsteps on the old wooden floor and the sound of his heart beating in his chest. He found an empty chair near the back and sat down, keeping his eyes on his hands. Then James looked up and saw Rebecca sitting across the circle from him. She was wearing a simple blue dress, and the bruise on her face had healed completely. But when their eyes met, James could see that some hurts take longer to heal than others. Rebecca had been coming to these meetings for 6 weeks. At first, she came because Pastor Baker had asked her to, but as time went on, she found that talking with other people who had experienced unfair treatment helped her deal with her own pain. She had been preparing herself for the day when James might show up, but seeing him still made her stomach feel tight. Pastor Baker welcomed everyone and explained that tonight would be different. Someone new had joined them, someone who had caused pain, but wanted to learn how to heal it. The pastor looked at James with kind but serious eyes. James stood up slowly, his legs feeling weak beneath him. He had practiced what he wanted to say, but now all his words seemed to disappear. The room was so quiet he could hear the old building settling round them. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness," James said, his voice shaking like a leaf in the wind. "But I want you all to know that I understand now. I see how wrong I was. Not just that day with Agent Johnson, but for years before that." James told the group about the counseling sessions he had started attending with Dr. Patricia Miller, a therapist who specialized in helping people understand their own prejudices. At first, James had resisted her questions and gotten angry when she challenged his thinking. But slowly, he began to see how his attitudes had been shaped by fear and ignorance. "I learned that racism is not just about hating people," James continued. "It is about all the small ways we treat people differently because of what they look like. I did that for years without even realizing it." Dr. Miller had given James books to read about the history of discrimination in America. James learned about things that had never been taught in his school or talked about in his family. He read about how police departments had sometimes been used to keep certain groups of people down instead of protecting everyone equally. James also started volunteering at the Millbrook Community Food Bank, which was located in the part of town he had once avoided. The food bank served families who did not have enough money to buy groceries, and many of the people who came there were black families dotted first. James felt awkward and out of place. The families who came to the food bank looked at him with suspicion, and he did not blame them. But Mrs. Dorothy Washington, who ran the food bank, gave him a chance to prove himself. Actions speak louder than words, Mrs. Washington told James. On his first day, if you really want to change, show us through what you do, not just what you say. James spent his Saturdays sorting canned goods and helping families carry groceries to their cars each. He met children who reminded him of his own, son and daughter. He met parents who worked 2 jobs but still struggled to pay rent. He began to see these people as individuals with hopes and dreams, not as the stereotypes his prejudice had created. Rebecca watched James's efforts with careful attention. She had seen too many people say they were sorry without really meaning it, but as weeks passed, she heard reports from other people in the community about James's volunteer work. She heard that he was attending counseling regularly and reading books about racial justice change. "It's possible," Rebecca told a group of high school students during a school assembly about speaking up against injustice. "But it takes courage from all of us. We must speak up when we see unfair treatment, and we must also be willing to forgive when someone truly changes their heart." James began writing letters to every person he could remember treating unfairly. During his years as a police officer, the letters were hard to write because he had to admit specific things he had done wrong. Many people never wrote back, and James understood why they could not forgive him. But some people did respond. They told James how his actions had made them feel afraid or angry or sad. Reading these letters made James cry, but he knew he needed to understand the full weight of what he had done. Slowly, James began to find a new purpose in his broken life. The clock on the wall showed exactly 9 in the morning when James Thompson walked into the large training room at the State Police Academy. 1 year had passed since the terrible day when he struck Rebecca Johnson, and his life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. The room was filled with police officers from towns and cities across the state. Some were young recruits who had just finished their basic training, while others were experienced officers who had been working for many years. They all sat quietly, waiting to hear from the man who had once been one of them. James no longer wore a police uniform. Instead, he dressed in a simple gray suit that made him look more like a teacher than a former cop. His hands shook slightly as he looked out at the sea of faces. But his voice was steady when he began to speak. "I was once like some of you might be now," James said, his words carrying across the silent room. "I thought I was doing my job well. I thought I was protecting my community. But I was really letting my fears and prejudices guide my actions. Instead of facts and fairness," James told the officers about his 15 years on the Millbrook police force. He explained how his biases had grown slowly over time, like weeds that nobody notices until they take over a garden. He talked about all the times he had treated people differently because of the color of their skin, and how he had convinced himself that he was just being careful. "I hurt innocent people," James continued, his voice getting stronger. "I hurt families in my own community. And I hurt a fellow law enforcement officer who was just trying to make our town safer for everyone." At the back of the room, Rebecca Johnson listened to James speak. She wore her FBI badge proudly on her dark blue blazer, and she had been promoted to senior special agent just 3 months earlier. The scar on her cheek had faded to almost nothing, but the memory of that day was still clear in her mind. This police training program had been Rebecca's idea, after James's case went to court and he received his punishment of community service and counseling. Rebecca had worked with FBI officials and local police departments to create a new kind of training. She believed that officers could learn more from hearing real stories than from reading textbooks. James's testimony had become the heart of the program. His willingness to admit his mistakes and share his journey of change had already reached hundreds of police officers across 3 states. Some officers were angry when they first heard his story, but most left the training sessions thinking differently about their own actions. When James finished speaking, Rebecca stood up to address the officers. She had spoken at dozens of these sessions over the past year, and she never got tired of sharing her message of hope and accountability. Trust can be rebuilt, Rebecca told the room full of officers. But it requires honest work from everyone. We must hold each other accountable and never stop learning about the communities we serve. Rebecca explained how the changes in Millbrook had created a model that other towns were now copying. The new police chief, Captain Maria Rodriguez, had implemented community policing programs that brought officers and citizens together in positive ways. Officers now attended monthly dinners at local churches and schools, building relationships before problems occurred. The results had been amazing. Crime rates in Millbrook had actually gone down by 30% as trust between police and citizens improved. When people trusted their police officers, they were more willing to report crimes and cooperate with investigations. James had found new work as a counselor at the Millbrook Recovery Center, helping people who struggled with addiction and anger problems. He used his own story of change to show others that it was possible to overcome their worst impulses and become better people. Every day, James met with people who had made terrible mistakes. Just like he helped a young man named Tommy, who had been arrested for fighting while drunk. He counseled a woman named Lisa who had lost her children because of her drug addiction. He showed them that change was possible, but only if they were willing to do the hard work of looking at themselves honestly. On the anniversary of that terrible day, Rebecca and James met at the exact spot on Maple Street where their lives had collided so violently. They had decided to plant a small oak tree there as a symbol of new growth and hope for the future. The tree was just a sapling, barely 3 feet tall, but it was healthy and strong. James dug the hole while Rebecca prepared the roots, and they worked together in comfortable silence. It felt strange to be standing in the same place where so much pain had occurred, but now they were creating something beautiful. "Thank you," James said quietly as they patted soil on the base of the tree. "Thank you for believing that people can change, even when they do terrible things." Rebecca smiled. And for the first time since that awful day, her smile reached her eyes. "We all have the power to choose who we become. James, you choose to become better, and that choice has helped so many other people." Their story had spread far beyond the borders of Millbrook. Newspapers had written articles about their unlikely partnership. Television shows had interviewed them about forgiveness and redemption. Other communities were starting their own programs, based on what had worked in their small town. As they stood by their newly planted tree, Rebecca and James watched children playing in the nearby park. The children came from all different backgrounds and skin colors, but they played together without seeing differences. They laughed and ran and shared toys as if the divisions that had once torn their community apart had never existed. The tree they had planted would grow tall and strong over the years, its roots spreading deep into the earth, just like the changes they had helped bring to their town. The tree would provide shade and beauty for generations to come. The end.